Okay, so welcome to Eat, Move, Think, the show about optimal wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Wow. Do it again.
Oh, I was practicing.
Okay, ready?
Welcome
to
Eat, Move, Think,
the show about
Optimal
wellness.
brought to you by
Medcan.
Yeah, this is extremely good. Thank you.
Jasmine, I'm so interested in this interview you were on recently.
Yes, it's talking about some pretty innovative, exciting things.
Dr. Sandra Black, Dr. Peter Nord, the chief medical officer at Medcan, interviewed her.
And the two of them have worked together for years, so it's nice they go way back.
It's interesting because Canada's population is getting older.
A lot of Canadians are turning 100, actually. I think there are almost 13,500 centenarians in Canada, and that's a 43% hike since 2018.
These stats are all based on data performed by Environics Analytics. 1 in 4 Canadians will be 65 years or older by 2043. We are getting older as a population.
And so that's requiring us to start to think about brain health and cognitive conditions like dementia or
maintaining
Alzheimer's.
cognitive health for as long as possible. Which brings us back to Dr. Sandra Black.
Yeah, Dr. Sandra Black is doing something so advanced, it feels like sci-fi-ish. Her lab is more or less growing human brains.
And what does that have to do with our overall health?
It'd probably help you remember to pay for parking, for one.
Bane of my existence.
I'm Jasmine Ratch.
I'm Chris Shulgin.
We're the producers of Eat, Move, Think.
And in this episode, we have our wellness host, Dr. Peter Nord, talking with
Dr. Sandra Black. So she's the scientific director of the Dr. Sandra Black Center for Brain Resilience and Recovery at Sunnybrook Research Institute. And this episode also features an interview with Dr. JoAnne McLaurin. She's the platform director of the biological sciences. Dr. McLaurin was pivotal in setting up this organoid facility that's new at Sunnybrook. This is a really cool new way that scientists are able to study the brain. Dr. McLaurin gets into this, but until now, they've really only been able to study rodent brains, but now they can grow human brain sections. As I said, it sounds like it's from a sci-fi movie, so really cool stuff that's happening right next door. And while that part sounds really interesting, a huge component of the lab also is made up of what you do in your own life and how that can really decide whether or not you do get a cognitive disease like Alzheimer's or dementia. No matter your hereditary risk, if you do certain things in your life every day, you can put off that risk.
If you want to maximize the amount of time that you stay sharp in your lifespan, this is the episode for you.
All right, here's Dr. Peter Nord chatting with Dr. Sandra Black.
Hello, I'm happy to be back on Eat, Move, Think today. I have a fantastic guest that I've been the pleasure and honor of working with for many years, Dr. Sandra Black. Welcome.
Thanks. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, our connection goes back many years. I'm going to say almost 2 decades on my side. My previous life, I was at Unity Health Toronto, and I was doing quite a bit of work on the rehab side. So when individuals would end up with strokes at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center under Dr. Black's care and her team's care, she would stabilize them, and people with moderate to severe strokes would end up in my rehab unit at Providence Healthcare, part of Unity Health Toronto. A lot of people owed their lives to Dr. Black and her team for basically saving them from potentially death or significant disability. After a few weeks of rehab, many of those people ended up walking home. So amazing work.
I can't tell you how exciting it was to reverse a stroke or to reduce the disability so they got to Providence, or they didn't die, or they were able to make good progress when they went there. And of course, stroke is also a risk factor for dementia. Stroke by itself can cause dementia and be a risk factor for later dementia from Alzheimer's disease. So all these things now are under better control so people can have these conditions and still do well. And that is another important aspect of progress.
Yeah. I mean, we used to think that dementia was Alzheimer's, and then all of a sudden we started realizing, hey, there's this sort of vascular dementia, and more realizing, wow, this is a huge portion of people that have vascular compromise in their brain. And the good news is we can actually intervene early with blood pressure control, cholesterol management, all those good things, and really push off that risk of vascular dementia years or decades. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what's the Hurvitz program and your lab. What other exciting things are going on? And one of the things that it raised a few eyebrows was this idea of these organoids that are being grown. And many of our listeners may not have heard of what is an organoid and what's a brain cell organoid. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about Hurvitz, a little about your lab.
Yeah, what we've done is the Hurvitz Brain Sciences program has tried to focus on some of the most disabling conditions. So it's basically stroke, dementia, depression, and also now brain tumors. And we depend on philanthropy. Without that, it would be hard to do. So, we try to use everything we can to help people age better and sort of go through their disorders better. And the idea is we supply blood samples, and it's sort of miraculous to me. They get their white blood cells, they can turn them into neurons. They can turn them into anything but neurons.
And they're sort of basic stem cells.
It sounds very straightforward, but it actually is very expensive to do this. It costs $18,000 in Canadian to raise one of these. But what struck me was you have to tend to them with tender, loving care. It's really interesting. And these are just little cells.
We can actually grow small hippocampi and small cortices from a person's skin or blood cells. And by having the human system, we're hoping, and we don't have the answers yet because we're still working on it, that testing drugs in the human system will actually get us to a place where we can actually translate more drugs to people.
That's Dr. JoAnne McLaurin. She's the director of the Biological Sciences platform at Sunnybrook Research Institute, and she was involved in setting up the organoid facility.
I am a neuroscientist who does Alzheimer's disease research. What we do at the Research Institute is many things, but what I'm involved in particular is Alzheimer's disease, but dementia in general. What causes dementia? What things can we do that might help prevent, so decrease our risk of getting it in later age? And also understanding once we have it, what can we do to increase the quality of life of someone who has the disease such that they have a good lifespan before actually it gets to the point where they start not to really function well. We use primarily rodent models, and rodent models have been phenomenally informative to help us understand disease. But where they really lack is that although we can understand the disease process, when we start to do drug development, the drugs that we've developed in rodents don't always work in people. And that's very common. I would say that most of the drugs that we develop actually fail once it goes into a person. Because of that, we needed to generate new models. And the new models we need are something that's closer to a human. And so one of the technological advances that happened in 2012 was a scientist was awarded the Nobel Prize for identifying some factors that could take any cell in your body that is fully differentiated, like a skin cell or a blood cell or a brain cell, and turn it back to a stem cell. And a stem cell is a cell that will make any other cell in your body. So once you have that stem cell, then you can make new cells from it. Where we've gone from there, we've now discovered how we can take that stem cell and make a small organ. So it's not a full organ. It has a lot of the properties of, for example, the brain. Our brains are huge, so we can't do the whole brain, so we can do brain regions.
So is Sunnybrook growing human brains in their lab, and are brain transplants on the horizon?
Okay, I won't say people haven't thought of it, because as scientists, we always think of where we can take it. It might take us quite a few years to get there, but we have thought of that. We have put them into rodents, and they do survive in a rodent brain. So, we're on the road there. We're not there yet, but we do know that in the past, stem cells have been put into human brains, and those stem cells have grown into neurons and supported the brain. So it's a possibility, but we're not there. Precision medicine is really what we're looking for. Because, and I'm not going to say you're going to get dementia, but your dementia and my dementia may be very different, and how it progresses might be slightly different. And part of that is because of our genetic codes. So you're made up of the genetic code that you've inherited from your mom and dad, and mine is different from my parents. But the other thing that changes our genetic code as we age is we get these little marks, and they're called methylation on our DNA. And those marks affect how we react to drugs and how we react to disease processes. So you and I might be equally susceptible for it, but those marks may change how we actually end up getting the disease and our progression. We're lucky that we have patient populations that are very dedicated to research. So people who actually have dementia and Alzheimer's disease actually donate their blood to research. We actually are studying real people with dementia, their small little organoids. And then we can follow the disease in the organoid and then understand the disease in a different way and a more precise way. And so if I can take your blood cells, and if we had it, which we do not now, had 10 different drugs that worked for dementia, then I could put those on yours and know that you needed X drug, and put them on mine and know that I needed Y. It's something like when we have headaches. You know how some people take aspirin and some people take Tylenol and some people take ibuprofen? Something different works for everybody. The same might be true for dementia, and I would suggest, I believe that it is true, although we haven't fully shown that yet.
Dr. Black and Dr. McLaurin both say that although our family history can affect our risk for Alzheimer's disease or dementia, we have a lot of control over how much the condition will or won't affect us throughout our lives.
I will make points about things that people can do in their daily lives that are very important and also sometimes need help. First of all, diet.
Yeah.
What you eat is really important. And, people talk about the Mediterranean diet, which is fruits and vegetables, fish, not too much red meat, especially beef, maybe a little more toxic to vessels, right? So a balanced diet, but with lots of fruits and vegetables. We also mentioned vitamin D, because vitamin D is important for immune function as well as brain function and bone. And interestingly, in China, when the COVID pandemic started, they were measuring all kinds of things in the ICUs, and they measured vitamin D. And they put out a little paper early on saying people with low vitamin D were more likely not to survive.
They would do worse in hospital, yeah.
And of course, in Canada, where we happen to be located, we're kind of up north. And also, we're all supposed to be wearing, kind of protection for our skin, right? So we don't even maybe absorb it as much as we should. So I think it's one of the supplements that, people need to add. There's also some data that suggests extra virgin olive oil, 2 tablespoons, you just dump it on your salads or whatever, has some protective effect. They actually did a study showing that that might be the case.
Yeah, we touched on a couple of these things, and we're at episode 196 of Eat, Move, Think, and we've actually been able to dig into that with some degree. So it's great to hear you kind of pulling all that together.
It's under people's control, right? It's your choice. And that is empowering, but also very important. And I think we're always happy when people, do have those good habits. The other thing is physical exercise. So everybody thinks you got to do aerobics. And aerobics are great if you can do them, but a lot of people can't, and older people often can't because they got, knee problems, etc., me included. But they have data that suggests walking for a certain number of steps a day is good for the brain.
Dr. McLaurin also mentions the importance of walking for our brain health.
I have a dog. And so I walk my dog twice a day, as well as all the walking I do at work, etc. So I am doing over 10,000 steps a day. You don't have to do 10,000 steps. The magic number they've now figured out to be 7,000 steps. If you can get up and start to move, get your heart working, your heart pumps more blood around your body, you're getting more blood into your brain, you're getting more oxygen levels. Exercise, one, increases nutrient flow, but the second thing it does, which we know about, it stimulates your neurons, it's called neuroplasticity, to function better. So they talk to each other better. So I walk my dog. I also do Pilates to stay strong, so my muscles are strong.
And you just walk.
Nothing fancy.
You can be on a treadmill, but in the winter in Canada, you can't go, you got to be careful. And we say when people are going out for walks, You can use the ski poles, right?
Keep you upright.
Because we don't want falls, and we still don't want falls in the ice because that's bad for you. But anyway, physical exercise is very important. And I think that's because my theory is in Africa, this is where it's thought that the human species evolved. Walking was very important for survival. It was important to stimulate memory when you were walking, because if you had to find food or a tree, which meant that there was something here that you could get, you had to remember exactly where that was. You had to encode it and remember it. So walking actually stimulates the memory area of the brain.
Perfect.
So that's good. And that's something everybody can do almost, even if you have some disabilities, right?
Yep. And good for your bones, good for weight-bearing activity, keeps the bones strong, prevents hip fractures. Yep.
The other that's very amazing to me is, we have all these different organs we get specialized in. So I'm sort of a brain doctor, and there's heart doctors, and there's kind of stomach doctor, all the rest of it. But we talk about heart-brain connection. That's really obvious. I mean, problems in your heart, or if you have a irregular rhythm called atrial fibrillation, it can cause stroke and so on. But I was really blown away by a study that showed when people do aerobic exercise, there's a little additional benefit because the muscle, this blew my mind. The muscle secretes a protein called irisin, irisin. It goes to the hippocampus. It stimulates what we call neurogenesis, making new memories. Aerobic exercise has extra benefit. If your heart can take it, it's good for your heart, but it's good for your brain.
Absolutely. All the arteries everywhere. Kidney arteries, peripheral vascular arteries, all those things. If you have, some sort of pathophysiology going on in one artery, you sort of have to assume it's probably going on in some of those other arteries as well.
Some of the things that contribute to that are high blood pressure, cholesterol, high cholesterol, and diabetes, right? But high blood pressure should not exist. And it's something a lot of people are aware of. They did a study in our hospital a while ago. As people were going to the cafeteria, they offered to take their blood pressure. These are staff, in the hospital. It was shocking how many people had high blood pressure.
No symptoms attached.
So that was really eye-opening. And everybody has a duty to know their blood pressure. And now you can get the home cuffs.
Yep, inexpensive. You can get them in any pharmacy.
Or you can even go to a pharmacy and do it, right?
Yeah.
And that's a treatable condition that is very hard on the brain as well as the heart and the vessels.
Here's Dr. McLaurin on why exactly high blood pressure can increase your risk of dementia or Alzheimer's disease.
People who get high blood pressure in midlife need to get it under control because high blood pressure wrecks your blood vessels. It puts a strain on them, and over time, they don't work as well. Your brain uses 80% of the oxygen that we bring into the body. And the way you get your oxygen is through your blood vessels. So if your blood vessels in your brain are not working as well, you're not getting the oxygen to the brain that you need for it to function. The same is true of nutrients. A lot of nutrients, of course, come from our food, and they get delivered to the brain as well. And it's also through our blood vessels. So compromising your blood vessels is going to compromise the function of your brain. And over time, that can lead to an increased risk of dementia. If we know this is about your blood vessels not functioning as well, what can we do to support them so that they do function better? So although I had high blood pressure, can I get my risk back down to zero? And I think that's going to have a huge impact for people, huge impact.
To summarize, really easy, eat plus move equals think.
Exactly right. That's why I thought it was a great title.
Yeah. Eat plus move equals think.
So the other thing is sleep.
Mm-hmm.
This is something else that people have to understand, especially younger people in their middle age. They think snoring is okay. Everybody snores. But what's important is not the snoring, it's if you stop breathing. That's called sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a very bad thing for your brain. It disrupts the nice rhythm of what's happening during sleep. You need at least 6 cycles where you're getting slow wave sleep. It's kind of like those are the bass of the orchestra, and you get dreaming sleep, which is like the violins, okay? And you have this slow wave sleep, and you have this what we call REM sleep, where it's dreaming sleep, 6 cycles minimum. And that's because during the slow wave sleep, your brain is literally pumping garbage out of the brain. And that garbage, in a sense, is also this protein called amyloid, which is what accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. And also, if you're apneic, you get alarm bells because you're not breathing. And so you get a spout of high blood pressure, you get an adrenaline surge. And if that's not treated over time, it starts to drive your blood pressure up. You don't get restorative sleep. So that's something else people need to be aware of. It's highly treatable. And now there are even better kinds of masks if people have actually apnea. Sometimes it's positional, or there are different ways you can handle it. But sleep and restorative sleep is really important. So that's the third one. And then, the vascular risk factors. But the fourth one is social engagement. And that's been a real problem during the pandemic. This has been a very hard time in world history, but in people's lives. And they did a survey where they looked at the sociability index. And social index, I guess, is just how much empathy you have and how you get along with people, how you feel. And they had data on this, I think it was middle schoolers and early high schoolers before the pandemic. And then they did it after things started to settle down, after a couple of years. And you know what they found?
What's that?
They described it as pandemic kids were meaner.
Really? The mean index.
That's right. They were meaner in the sense that they didn't have that experience of day to day. You're out playing and somebody's dad is sick, somebody else, they're getting divorced or things are happening. And, they didn't have all those exposures. They weren't developing their empathy through experience, because that's hard to get from a book.
Or a monitor.
I hadn't thought of it that way, because it's not just learning the actual skills, the intellectual skills, but it's the people skills. And it turns out that social engagement helps you be healthier, because we're a very social creature and we need to have friendships and kindness, and we have to get through ups and downs. And so social engagement is another factor. Now, some of this is based on a very interesting study done in Chicago. It's called the Chicago Aging Study. And they describe some of these factors as being protective because they follow people over 20, 30 years. And they often agreed to give their brains as donations. And they found just how they progressed. And if they developed Alzheimer's disease, some of the nuns were even in their late 90s and hundreds, that these factors all seem to have a protective effect, which is a big message, I think, for us all. And just a reminder that there are a lot of things under our own control that, we should be thinking of doing. And the social engagement I thought was really interesting.
And what's the biggest enemy of social engagement? Dr. McLaurin thinks it's the TV.
Social interactions are really key. Don't sit in front of the TV and, just veg out. Talk to people, interact with people. People say do crosswords, do Sudoku, do whatever as well. It's better than sitting in front of the TV. Your brain is the same as a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it.
It's all connected.
We talk about it takes a village, to raise a child. But those are the things that if you're lucky enough to be in a situation or a culture or a country where you can do these proper things from a young age, then you're going to have a better old age.
Yeah, and we've talked in the past about there's lifespan and then there's health span. We're very, very good at rescuing people once they're sick and creating more longevity. But to what end? Because if they're living with chronic disease and the quality of life is terrible, nobody really wants that. They want to live longer and live weller as they age. So much is let's back the bus up. Let's think about what we can do early so that we push off that chronic disease and then be super active and leave this earth like a light switch. So super important.
And that's something I think that we need to, from childhood on, right? That's the point.
I work with a national group, and they're called EPLAD, which stands for Engagement of People with Lived Experience in Dementia. And the group is made up of people who have dementia, as well as their caregivers. They've taught me that they have more capacity to interact and to share their experiences and their disease than we thought. And that their interactions with me have changed some of the research questions that I'm actually answering. So having a diagnosis of dementia isn't the end. It's just the beginning of the journey, because they're fighting it the whole way. And I can see they're maintaining a lot of their cognitive performance because of it. And so if everyone who gets it, rather than look at it as the end of something, look at it as the beginning of a journey, I think that mentally we'll all do better.
And we're moving toward potentially there might be new treatments for the early stage of Alzheimer's disease. So we're in a bit of a new era, and we now have new biomarkers. And now we have blood tests. That's the other really amazing thing. We have blood tests that can tell you have Alzheimer pathology in your brain. This is transformative, Peter, because the family doctors aren't guessing, what does this person have or what should we do?
Wow.
Here's Dr. McLaurin with a really simple breakdown on how exactly the Alzheimer's biomarkers blood test works.
Right now, the definitive way to tell if you have Alzheimer's disease is an autopsy after death. Unless you have one of the mutations that we can pick up in your blood, the other forms that we don't know what causes it, it's autopsy at the end. So we have been looking for a long time for ways to try and diagnose it. So the first path of techniques was imaging techniques like MRI and PET scans. But anyone who's ever had to have an MRI or a PET scan for any other reason, you know what the long waiting lists are in Canada, and it's just not feasible. And it's not feasible just because of the waiting times, but it's not feasible because it's not accessible to everybody. People who live out in the country don't have access to an MRI. They have to come into more of a major city. And that's a huge limitation. So where people went next is a blood test. So can we look in your blood and look for a signature of changes that would tell us that you have dementia? It's not one thing that changes. It's not two things that change, but it's a signature. And at the moment, the blood test that they have is a change in 5 different proteins. And the direction, whether it's up or down, gives you an idea of whether you have Alzheimer's disease or not. People's ethnic background does change the expression of all these proteins. If you're white Caucasian, the proteins might change in one way. And if you're Black, it might be a slightly different way. And if you're Indian, a slightly different way as well. And so we need to understand all those things so that the blood test is universally applicable and not just for a single population.
Amazing. So what's the blood test actually called? If we were to say, hey, if you want that, we've got it at Medcan, how would we be able to access that?
First thing we got to do, Peter, and we need pressure for this, is we need the Health Canada to approve it. It's available in the States. And we just call it the plasma biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease. So we need to put pressure to get those available because a lot of people don't realize the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's disease are underway before you know it.
Wow. And again, we're getting better at understanding the genetics as well. This is exactly what the Medcan model of prevention and quality of life and quantity of life is all about. And you've basically designed a way to think about Eat, Move, Think, and those big ticket items like Alzheimer's that touch so many people. If it's not personal, we have friends, parents, colleagues, that have all been touched by some form of, whether it's neurocognitive, neurodegenerative disease, stroke. And that's actually where Medcan comes in. We have tens of thousands of people that come to us every year, and whether it's prevention or early recognition of disease, treating disease early and aggressively, that's exactly the Medcan model. That's why it's really exciting. Our genetics program is the largest in Canada outside of a hospital. So we're doing whole genome sequencing. We're starting to get into the genetics of Alzheimer's. So we're having more and more people that are, the lights going on, are realizing exactly that we have to take some accountability and back the bus up and start to think about, what's health, what's wellness at a very early age. So this has been fantastic.
And an ounce of profession is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yeah.
And, we're competitive as creatures, but we're always at our best when we're compassionate and caring, right? I just wish there was a way we could share the whole planet in a much more healthy manner. But anyway, it's been fun to rant.
Well, that's a fantastic way to wrap up. Thank you so much. This has been really, really good.
Thank you. My pleasure.
That was Medcan's Chief Medical Officer and our wellness host, Dr. Peter Nord, in conversation with Dr. Sandra Black, the Scientific Director of the Dr. Sandra Black Center for Brain Resilience and Recovery at Sunnybrook Research Institute, as well as Dr. JoAnne McLaurin, the Director of the Biological Sciences Platform at Sunnybrook Research Institute and a professor at the University of Toronto. Do you want to know your risk for Alzheimer's disease or dementia? Get in touch with Medcan's world-class genetic team by emailing genetics@medcan.com or call 416-350-5900. You can follow Medcan on Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube to catch all of the video versions of our podcast episodes at Medcan Live Well. We'll post episode highlights and other links that you can visit on our website, eatmovethinkpodcast.com. Say hello and send us a tip or a suggestion by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com. Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau. I'm Jasmine Ratch, managing producer. Social media and strategy support is from Chantel Gerton, Andrew Imex, and Elaine Jeanette. Executive producer is Christopher Shulgin. We'll be back soon with another episode examining the latest in health and wellness. This podcast episode is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with any specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.